I always believed that trust was the foundation of a marriage. 7 years together, and I never once doubted Lauren's loyalty. She was my wife, my partner, the person I had built a life with. If someone had told me a year ago that she was capable of betrayal, I would have laughed in their face. That was how much faith I had in her. But faith, as I would come to learn, can be the most dangerous thing in the wrong hands. Our marriage had always been a balance of responsibilities. I handled the finances, ensuring that bills were paid on time, that we had savings, that everything was in order. Lauren, on the other hand, was more carefree. She was a social butterfly, full of life, always surrounded by people. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant she set her own hours, took on projects as she pleased, and had a schedule that was as unpredictable as the weather. At first, I admired that about her. She was spontaneous, adventurous, the kind of person who could make any situation feel exciting. I was the opposite, steady, predictable, a planner. We balanced each other out. Or at least, that was what I used to believe. The first signs of something being off were subtle. A late-night work call here, a sudden business trip there. At first, I didn't question it. Lauren's work had always been fluid, and clients could be demanding. But then, the late nights became more frequent. The trips became more secretive. And the worst part? She had started to change in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. She used to be open with her phone, leaving it on the counter, face up, without a second thought. Now, she carried it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. She used to tell me about her projects, about the clients she worked with. Now, she barely mentioned work at all. When I asked her how things were going, she would give vague answers, brushing me off as if my curiosity was an inconvenience. Still, I trusted her. I told myself I was imagining things, that after 7 years together, maybe we had just settled into a comfortable routine where we didn't feel the need to update each other on every little detail. But deep down, something gnawed at me. And then came Derek. I had met him a few times at social gatherings, introduced as one of Lauren's clients. A marketing executive, charming in a way that made people gravitate toward him. He wasn't particularly remarkable, not someone I considered a threat. He was just a name, a face in the background of Lauren's world. But then I started noticing how often his name came up. "Oh, Derek sent me some new design requests today," Lauren would say casually. Or, "Derek's company is hosting an event, and they invited me to network." At first, I didn't think much of it. But then the conversations became more frequent, and before I knew it, his name had become a regular presence in our lives. One evening, Lauren was getting ready to head out for what she claimed was a last-minute client dinner. I watched her from the bed, my stomach tightening as she put on a dress that she hadn't worn in years, applied makeup with a precision that felt out of place for a business meeting. "Who's the client?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She glanced at me in the mirror. "Oh, just some people from Derek's firm. Networking stuff." I nodded, forcing myself to smile. "Late-night networking, huh?" She laughed, walking over to kiss my cheek. "You know how these things go. Don't wait up." And with that, she was gone. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at the closed door, a knot forming in my stomach. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't sure if I knew my wife at all. Suspicion is a strange thing. It starts as a whisper in the back of your mind, easy to ignore, easy to brush aside. You tell yourself you're imagining things, that your paranoia is unfounded. But the more you try to suppress it, the louder it gets. And before you know it, it's not a whisper anymore. It's a roaring certainty that refuses to be silenced. That's where I found myself with Lauren. At first, I had tried to dismiss the uneasy feeling in my gut. I chalked up her behavior to work stress, to the natural shifts that happen in a long-term relationship. But as the days passed, as Derek's name continued to come up in passing conversations, that unease settled into something deeper, something more insidious. Then, one night, I stumbled upon the first real crack in her story. It started innocently enough. I was reviewing some paperwork, handling our monthly expenses, when I noticed something off in our health insurance records. A discrepancy. Lauren's name was there, of course, but so was Derek's. Not as a dependent, not as a beneficiary. as a spouse. I blinked, certain I was misreading it. But there it was, plain as day. Lauren had listed Derek as her husband. My breath caught in my throat. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the screen, my mind refusing to process what I was looking at. It had to be a mistake, a clerical error, some kind of mix-up in the system. But the longer I stared, the more impossible that explanation became. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. My hands curled into fists. I thought back to all the late nights, the secretive glances at her phone, the unexplained trips, the way she had become distant, detached, like she was living a life parallel to mine, just close enough to maintain the illusion of a marriage, but far enough away that I was never truly part of it. And now this. She had lied to me. She had done more than that. She had rewritten our reality, placed another man in a role that belonged to me. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. The betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the audacity of it, the sheer recklessness of her deceit. She hadn't just cheated. She had built an entire framework around it, a second life that existed within the cracks of our marriage. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think rationally. Confronting her now wouldn't get me the answers I needed. If she had gone this far to keep her secret, she wouldn't suddenly break down and confess just because I demanded it. No, if I wanted to truly understand the depths of her deception, I had to play it smart. I made a decision in that moment. I wouldn't say anything. Not yet. I would wait, watch, and gather the full picture before I made my move. Lauren had played me for a fool for long enough. It was time for me to return the favor. That night, when she came home, I acted like nothing had changed. She walked into the bedroom, tossing her bag onto the chair, stretching as if she had just finished an exhausting day. "Long night," she murmured, kicking off her heels. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Yeah? Anything interesting happen?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking her head. "Just the usual. Clients are being a pain. You know how it is." I did know how it was, but I also knew that she was lying through her teeth. I watched her as she undressed, moving through the room with a casual ease that made me sick. How many times had she come home to me after being with him? How many nights had I kissed her goodnight while she was thinking about someone else? I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep my emotions in check. Not yet. She slipped into bed beside me, sighing as she settled in. "You okay? You seem, I don't know, quiet." I turned to look at her, studying her face. How long had she been pretending? I smiled, the same easy, trusting smile I had always given her. "Yeah, just tired." And just like that, she believed me. Because in her mind, I was still the trusting husband, the man who would never question her, never suspect a thing. But she was wrong, because now I knew the truth. And I was going to make sure she paid for it. I spent the next few days living in a reality that wasn't mine. At least, not the version I had known. The marriage I thought I had, the life I believed in, had already been rewritten. I was just catching up to the truth, peeling back the layers of deception one by one, trying to make sense of how I had missed something so enormous. But I wasn't going to let emotions cloud my judgment. Lauren had played her game in the shadows, and if I wanted to get the full picture, I had to play along. Pretend like nothing had changed. Every morning, I kissed her goodbye, the same way I always did, even though the taste of betrayal lingered on my lips. Every evening, I asked about her day, nodding along as she fed me half-truths and outright lies, watching her carefully, studying her movements. She was comfortable, unaware that I was seeing her with new eyes. That was her first mistake. But I wasn't just watching. I was taking action. The first thing I did was remove Derek from the health insurance policy. It was easy, almost too easy. A few clicks, a simple update to our records, and just like that, he was gone. No more fraudulent claims, no more benefits under my name. Lauren wouldn't realize it right away. She wouldn't have a reason to check. And that was exactly what I was counting on. Next, I started gathering evidence. Not just for me, but for the inevitable moment when I would bring this all crashing down around her. I went through bank statements, cross-referencing transactions with dates I knew she had been working late. I checked phone records, seeing how often she had called or texted Derek. I even set up a hidden camera in the living room, not because I expected her to bring him here, but because I wanted to capture her, raw and unfiltered, in the moment she thought she was alone. I wanted to see if guilt ever surfaced, if she ever hesitated. She didn't. She carried on like everything was normal. Like she wasn't lying every single day. Like she hadn't erased my name and replaced it with someone else's when it benefited her. That was her second mistake. She had no idea that I was now in control, that every move she made was another step toward her own destruction. And I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to let her dig her own grave. That week, I watched her closely. I observed the way she smiled at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she took longer showers at night, probably texting him from the safety of the bathroom, the way she hesitated, just slightly, whenever I asked if she wanted to do something together, dinner, a movie, anything that would require real intimacy. I wasn't losing her. I had already lost her. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was beyond the pain now, that I was fueled purely by logic and strategy. But the truth was, it did hurt. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. Because for 7 years, I had loved her. I had given her my trust, my loyalty, my commitment, and she had thrown it away like it meant nothing. But I wasn't the fool anymore. One evening, as I sat in my home office, pretending to go over paperwork, I felt her come up behind me, her hands settling lightly on my shoulders. "Long day," she murmured, her fingers pressing gently against my muscles. I forced myself to stay still, to play my part. "Yeah, just a lot to handle." She leaned down, pressing a kiss against my cheek, the same lips that had probably kissed him hours before. I turned to look at her, studying the face I had memorized over the years, the features that had once brought me comfort. "You heading to bed?" She nodded, running a hand through her hair. "Yeah, early start tomorrow. Client meeting." "Client meeting. Right. Another excuse, another lie." I smiled at her. "Get some rest." She smiled back, and for a moment, I wondered if she had ever loved me at all. That night, after she had fallen asleep, I checked her phone. She always kept it close, but tonight, she had been careless. It was charging on her nightstand, screen facing up, unlocked. I took a deep breath and picked it up. There it was. A message from Derek. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Love you." I stared at the words, my grip tightening around the device. Love you. Not just a fling. Not just a mistake. A full-blown relationship. She shifted slightly in her sleep, unaware that her world was about to collapse. I put the phone down carefully, standing over her, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing. She had no idea. That was her third mistake, and it would be the one that destroyed her. A week later, the phone call came. I had been waiting for it, expecting it, knowing that sooner or later, Lauren's world was going to implode. But when I finally saw her name flash across my screen, the pure, frantic desperation in her voice took me by surprise. "Ethan," she gasped the moment I picked up, her words tumbling over each other. "Oh my God, I need you to do something for me. Right now." I leaned back in my chair, gripping the phone just a little tighter. "What's wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, calm. "It's Derek. He's been in an accident," she practically shrieked, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. "A car crash. He's in the hospital, and they're saying he needs emergency surgery. It's bad, Ethan. It's really bad." I remained silent for a beat, letting her panic settle. I could almost hear the way she was pacing, feel the way her heart was pounding through the phone. I imagined her standing in some sterile hospital waiting room, clenching her fists, trying to stay composed, trying to control something that was already slipping through her fingers. "That's awful," I finally said, feigning concern. "I hope he'll be okay." She exhaled sharply, as if relieved that I wasn't questioning her urgency. Yes, but listen, I need you to check our health insurance. I already gave them my information, but there's some sort of issue, and I don't understand why. The hospital is saying they can't find Derek in the system, but that doesn't make any sense." I closed my eyes, savoring the moment. There it was. The trap had sprung. I had waited for this, had orchestrated it so perfectly, knowing that she had built her entire deception around a single, careless assumption that I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't find out, that she could slip Derek onto our policy, reap the benefits of my trust, and I would remain blissfully unaware. But the moment I saw his name on that insurance document, I had taken control back. I had removed him, quietly, effortlessly, ensuring that when she needed that coverage the most, it wouldn't be there. And now, here she was, begging me to fix the problem she had created. Ethan, she pressed, her voice edging toward full-blown hysteria. I need you to call them. Now, tell them there's a mistake. This is serious. He could die. I kept my voice steady, unwavering. I'm sorry, Lauren. There's nothing I can do. A beat of silence. A hesitation. What do you mean? She asked, a sharp edge creeping into her tone. I leaned forward, letting the weight of my words settle. Derek isn't covered, Lauren. He's not on our policy. Another pause. Longer this time. But he was, she stammered, disbelief laced in every syllable. I added him. I made sure. I saw it myself. You did, I confirmed. But then I saw it too, and I removed him. The world seemed to go silent on the other end of the phone. I could hear her breathing, short and ragged, as the realization crashed down on her like a tidal wave. You. Her voice broke, then turned sharp. You did this? Of course I did, I said, my voice cold now, devoid of any sympathy. Because Derek isn't my responsibility. He never was. She made a strangled noise, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Ethan, you don't understand. He needs surgery. The hospital won't do it without proof of coverage. The bill? I don't care about the bill, Lauren, I interrupted, my patience razor thin. That's not my problem. That's yours. The silence that followed was deafening. This was the moment she realized that her entire plan had unraveled, that she had played her game too confidently, too recklessly, assuming that I would always be the man who cleaned up her mess. But now, standing at the edge of a disaster she had created, she had no safety net. No Derek, no money, no backup plan, and she had no one to blame but herself. Ethan, her voice was different now, softer, pleading. Please. We can fix this. I'll explain everything. Just help me this once and I swear, I'll make things right. I let out a slow exhale, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. No, Lauren, you don't get to ask me for anything. Not after this. But I love you, she whispered, and I almost laughed at how weak the words sounded now. You don't love me, I said simply. You just loved that I never questioned you. She let out a choked sob, but I didn't care. Not anymore. Without another word, I hung up. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. Lauren had made her choice, and now she would live with the consequences. I set my phone down on the desk, exhaling slowly as the silence settled around me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was the one in control. The weight that had been pressing against my chest for weeks, maybe months, had lifted. The anger, the betrayal, the quiet torment of knowing my wife had built an entire lie behind my back. It was all still there, but now it was hers to carry. Lauren had spent so much time thinking she was outsmarting me, weaving a story where I was the oblivious husband while she played house with Derek in the shadows. She had no idea that every step she took had only led her further into the trap she had set for herself. And now, she was the one scrambling. It wasn't my problem anymore. I could almost picture her standing in that hospital, her face pale with shock, hands shaking as she stared at the hospital administrator, telling her the same thing I had just told her. Derek isn't covered. She must have checked her phone, scrolling through every last email, every policy document, desperately looking for proof that had already been erased. And Derek? I imagined the moment she turned to him, voice trembling, telling him something had gone wrong, telling him she couldn't pay for his medical bills, that her plan, the one where she used my name, my money, my trust, had failed spectacularly. I knew exactly how that conversation would go. Derek wasn't the type of man to stick around when things got tough. I had seen it in his eyes the few times I met him. There was a casual arrogance about him, The way he carried himself, the way he spoke. He was the kind of man who liked things when they were easy. And now? Now, things were about to get very, very difficult. I could already hear his voice. You told me you had this under control, Lauren. You said there wouldn't be any issues. What the hell am I supposed to do now? It's not my fault, Derek. Something happened. I don't know how he found out, but Ethan must have removed you from the policy. So what? Now I'm stuck with a hospital bill I can't pay? Jesus, Lauren, what the hell did you think was going to happen? I smirked, shaking my head at the thought. Lauren had spent so much time lying to me that she had started believing her own delusions. She really thought she could have it both ways. A husband who kept the bills paid, who made sure life was stable and comfortable, while she played the perfect girlfriend to a man who didn't even respect her enough to see where the money was coming from. But reality was setting in now, and it wasn't going to be kind to her. My phone vibrated on the desk, breaking my thoughts. Another call from Lauren. I let it ring out. A few seconds later, a voicemail notification popped up. I sighed, tapping it open, bringing the phone to my ear. Ethan, please. You don't understand. I need you to fix this. I know I made a mistake, but we can talk about this later, okay? Just call the hospital and tell them there was a mix-up. We can figure everything out after that. Please, I deleted the message before she could finish. There was nothing to fix. She had done this to herself, and now she was finally seeing what life looked like without me cleaning up after her. The Lauren I had married, the woman I thought I knew, would have never done something like this. But that version of her had died a long time ago. The woman on the other end of the phone? She wasn't my wife anymore. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, letting out a slow breath. I should have been furious. Maybe a part of me still was. But the overwhelming feeling I had right now wasn't anger. It was satisfaction. Not because I wanted revenge. This wasn't about getting even. This was about justice. This was about finally breaking free of the illusion I had been living under. I glanced at my laptop, pulling up my email. My lawyer had sent over some paperwork earlier that day, documents I hadn't had the energy to look at before. The divorce papers. I hadn't signed them yet. Maybe I had still been holding on to something, some thread of what we used to be. But now, that thread had snapped. I clicked on the document, scrolling through the pages, scanning over the terms. We didn't have kids, which made things easier. The house was in my name, as were most of our assets, so there wasn't much to fight over. Lauren had always relied on me financially, so without me, she was on her own. I picked up my pen and signed my name at the bottom of the page. It was done. For the first time in 7 years, I was no longer Lauren's husband. The weight that lifted off my shoulders was unlike anything I had ever felt. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was free. I set my pen down on the desk, staring at the signature on the divorce papers. It was strange how final it looked. My name, neatly written at the bottom, was the last step in ending 7 years of marriage. 7 years of trust, of shared memories, of believing in a future that had been nothing more than a beautifully crafted lie. And now, with a few strokes of ink, I had erased her from my life. I should have felt something, anger, regret, sadness, but all I felt was relief. The kind that sinks deep into your bones, loosening every knot of stress, every sleepless night spent wondering where she was, what she was doing, who she was with. That weight was no longer mine to carry. Lauren had spent years taking me for granted. She had assumed, right up until the last moment, that I would always be the man who cleaned up her mess, the one who fixed things, who kept our life together while she recklessly tore it apart behind my back. But today, she learned the truth. I was done. My phone buzzed again. Another call. I didn't even need to look at the screen to know who it was. Lauren. I let it ring out. A few seconds later, a voicemail popped up. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed play, putting the phone to my ear. Ethan, please, just listen. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this isn't funny anymore. Derek is in the hospital, and they're saying we need to come up with the money up front, or they won't move forward with the surgery. This is serious, Ethan. You have to fix this. You owe me that much. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. I owe her? I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head in disbelief. This woman? The one who had been lying to me for months, maybe longer, actually had the audacity to think that I still owed her something. She was delusional. I deleted the voicemail and tossed my phone onto the desk. I could only imagine the scene unfolding in that hospital room right now. Lauren pacing frantically, her hands in her hair, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. And Derek, useless, pathetic Derek, probably sitting in that hospital bed, furious at her, realizing that she had sold him a dream built on my money, my stability, and now, with nothing left, she had nothing to offer him. They deserved each other. I stood up, stretching out the tension in my shoulders. I had been holding on to too much for too long. I needed air, needed to step outside and breathe in the reality of my new life. One without lies, without betrayal, without her. I grabbed my keys and walked out to my car, the cool evening air hitting my face as I slid into the driver's seat. I didn't have a destination in mind, but I just needed to drive, to clear my head. As I pulled onto the main road, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. I sighed, debating whether to listen to it. Curiosity won. I pressed play. Her voice was different this time. Softer. More desperate. Ethan, I don't know what to do. A shaky breath. Derek is furious with me. He doesn't understand. He's blaming me for everything. He thinks I lied to him. But I didn't, I swear. I thought you wouldn't notice. I thought I could handle everything. But now, he's saying it's over. That he doesn't want to be with someone who can't even take care of her own mess. I don't have anyone else, Ethan. Please, just talk to me. Just tell me what to do. I exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel. There it was. The moment I had been waiting for. Derek had left her. I knew it would happen. Men like him never stuck around when things got hard. He had been perfectly happy playing the role of the charming other man, when everything was smooth sailing, when there were expensive dinners and stolen weekends away, when there was the thrill of secrecy. But now, there was nothing left. No money, no insurance, no future, and he was gone. Lauren had built her entire escape plan around him, convinced that he would be there waiting for her when she finally left me. But she had made the same mistake with him that she had made with me. She had assumed too much. She thought he loved her. She thought she was irreplaceable. But the moment things got difficult, the moment he realized she had nothing to offer him, he walked away. And now, she was alone. I pulled over into an empty parking lot, staring at the dark horizon, listening to the quiet hum of the engine. It was over. Truly, finally, over. I had spent so much time caught up in her lies, trapped in the reality she had created, trying to piece together the person she had become. But now, I didn't need to try anymore. I didn't need to waste another second thinking about her, worrying about what she would do next. She had nothing to do with me anymore. I picked up my phone, hovered over her contact name for a moment, then pressed the block button. There would be no more calls, no more voicemails, no more Lauren. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, taking in the silence, the peace, the overwhelming feeling of freedom. I was done, and I had never felt better. The night air was crisp as I sat in my car, my fingers resting against the steering wheel, the hum of the engine a steady reminder that, for the first time in a long time, I was completely in control. I had blocked her. No more calls, no more messages, no more desperate pleas. Lauren was officially out of my life. But even as I stared at my phone, knowing that she could no longer reach me, I could still hear her voice in my head. The panic, the desperation, the realization that everything she had gambled on had fallen apart. She had been so sure that she could balance it all, her marriage to me, her affair with Derek, the security of my finances funding her secret life. But now she was left with nothing. I wondered how she was handling it. Was she sitting alone in our house, replaying everything in her mind, trying to figure out where it all went wrong? Or was she still at the hospital, pleading with Derek, trying to convince him that they could still make it work, that she could fix this somehow? Maybe she was finally realizing what I had known all along. Derek was never going to be her safety net. He was never going to be the man who stuck around when things got hard. He had been there for the fun, for the thrill, for the idea of being the man who won her over. But now that the illusion was shattered, He wanted nothing to do with her. I smirked at the thought. She had spent so much time lying, so much time manipulating, and in the end, the only person she had truly fooled was herself. I turned the key in the ignition, the soft rumble of the car breaking the silence around me. It was late, but I didn't want to go home just yet. I needed time, space, a moment to just breathe. The weight of everything was lifting, but that didn't mean it was gone. 7 years of marriage didn't just disappear overnight, no matter how much I wished it would. So, I drove. Not anywhere specific, just through the quiet streets, past dimly lit houses and empty sidewalks, letting my mind drift as the city passed by. At a red light, my phone buzzed. Not a call, just a notification from my email. I glanced down and saw my lawyer's name. Finalized divorce documents. I exhaled slowly. It was official. No more ties. No more waiting. No more legal limbo. I was free. I pulled into a parking lot, turning off the engine. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the email, letting it sink in. There was no sadness, no regret, just a quiet, steady sense of relief. I had spent years building a life with a woman who had never truly been mine. I had trusted her, loved her, built a future with her, only to realize that, all along, she had been planning her escape. But instead of her walking away on her terms, I had been the one to take control. And now, as I sat there, looking at the proof that she was no longer a part of my life, I felt lighter than I had in years. I thought about everything I had lost, but more importantly, everything I had gained. I had peace. I had freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I had my future back. Lauren was just another chapter in my story, one that was finally, permanently closed. The world didn't stop just because my marriage ended. The sun still rose, the clock still ticked forward, and life moved on with an indifference that was almost cruel. I had spent so much time caught in the wreckage of Lauren's betrayal, untangling the lies, preparing my counterattack, and finally walking away without looking back. And yet, as I sat in my car that night, staring at the finalized divorce papers on my phone, I realized something. For the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about anyone else but myself. There was no more second-guessing where my wife was when she said she was working late. No more scrutinizing every transaction in our joint account, wondering if my money was being used to finance another date with Derek. No more sitting in silence, feeling the presence of a woman who had already left me emotionally long before I had the chance to leave her physically. I was free. And yet, as I drove home, the silence in my car felt different. Not uncomfortable, not unsettling, just unfamiliar. For 7 years, my life had been built around us. Every decision I made had involved another person, whether it was planning vacations, choosing a house, or even something as simple as picking up groceries. Now, all of that was gone. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't sad. But I was standing at the edge of something new, a life that belonged entirely to me. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house I had once called home. It felt different now. It wasn't haunted by memories, but it also wasn't filled with warmth. It was just a house. For walls, a roof, a place where a marriage had unraveled piece by piece. I stepped inside, kicking off my shoes, feeling the quiet settle around me. There were no lingering traces of Lauren. After the divorce was finalized, she had come to collect her things, or rather, the things I let her take. She had walked through the house like a stranger, her eyes avoiding mine, stuffing clothes into suitcases, carefully avoiding anything that tied us together. She hadn't fought for the house, hadn't fought for much of anything, really. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to fight for. Maybe she was too busy trying to pick up the pieces of her ruined life. I wondered where she was now. Was she still at the hospital, dealing with Derek's injuries? Was she at some cheap motel, trying to figure out how to start over without the financial cushion she had grown used to? Was she alone, staring at the ceiling, realizing for the first time in her life that she had no one to bail her out this time? A part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I poured myself a drink, sinking into the couch, the weight of the day finally hitting me. It was over. Really over. There were no loose ends, no lingering doubts, no open wounds. The rage that had fueled me for weeks had burned itself out, leaving nothing behind but a man who was ready to start over. But where did I even begin? The thought of dating again didn't cross my mind. Not yet. I wasn't interested in replacing Lauren. I wanted to enjoy my own company, to reclaim the parts of myself I had neglected while trying to hold together a marriage that had already been broken beyond repair. I picked up my phone, scrolling through old messages, deleting everything that had Lauren's name attached to it. Every text, every call log, every picture we had taken together. It all went into the trash. She was a ghost now, a reminder of a life that no longer existed. As I scrolled, a message popped up, a name I hadn't seen in a while. Jake. You alive, man? Haven't heard from you in a minute. Jake had been my best friend for years, but after everything with Lauren, I had distanced myself. Not intentionally. It just happened. When you're caught up in trying to keep a sinking ship afloat, you don't have time to check in with the people who actually care about you. I stared at the message for a moment before replying. Me? Yeah. I'm good. Let's grab a drink soon. His response was immediate. Jake? Hell yeah. Tomorrow. My place. No excuses. I smirked, shaking my head. Some things never changed. For the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to something. It wasn't anything major, just a beer with an old friend, but it was a step. A small, important step toward moving on. I finished my drink, stretched, and made my way to bed. The house was quiet, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like a blank slate, like a fresh start. I wasn't Ethan, the betrayed husband anymore. I was just Ethan, and that was enough. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no weight pressing down on my chest, no creeping sense of dread about what new lie I might uncover, no need to wonder whether my wife was truly where she said she was. Because she was no longer my wife. It still felt strange to think about. Not in a painful way, just different. My entire adult life had been built around the idea of us. Now, there was only me. I got out of bed, stretching, feeling the stiffness in my muscles. My body had been carrying so much stress, so much tension, for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without the constant hum of betrayal in the background. I went through my morning routine, making coffee, scrolling through the news, checking emails, settling into the new normal. There was a time when Lauren's voice would have filled this space. She would have been in the kitchen, half-dressed, sipping coffee while scrolling through her phone, complaining about a client or gossiping about a friend. I would have listened, nodded at the right moments, kissed her on the forehead before heading to work. But that version of my life had been a lie. And now, I was done pretending. I grabbed my phone and sent a quick message to Jake. Still on for tonight? His response came almost instantly. Damn right. Bring beer. I smirked, shaking my head. Some things never changed. Work was uneventful. I moved through the day with a focus I hadn't had in months. I wasn't distracted anymore. I wasn't checking my phone every 10 minutes, wondering if I was going to find another piece of evidence that shattered what little trust one had left. I wasn't replaying conversations, analyzing every word, trying to figure out when Lauren had stopped being my wife and started being someone else's. By the time the day ended, I felt good. It was such a simple thing, but it had been so long since I felt it that I almost didn't recognize it. I stopped by the liquor store on my way to Jake's place, picking up a six-pack, my thoughts drifting as I drove through familiar streets. It had been too long since I had done this, since I had made time for myself, for the people who actually cared about me. When I pulled into Jake's driveway, he was already outside, leaning against his truck with a lazy grin on his face. Look who finally decided to stop being a hermit. I rolled my eyes, grabbing the beer. Shut up and opened the door. Inside, the house was the same as always, messy but lived in, comfortable. Jake had been my best friend since college, the kind of guy who could disappear for months and still pick up right where we left off. He cracked open a beer, tossing one to me before settling onto the couch. So, he said, taking a sip, you finally did it. I nodded, exhaling slowly. Yeah, signed the papers yesterday. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. You good? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Then I nodded again. Yeah, I am. He smirked. Good. Because I gotta be honest, man. You were turning into a shell of yourself? I laughed, shaking my head. Gee, thanks. I'm serious. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. I don't know when exactly it happened, but somewhere along the way, you stopped being you. Everything revolved around her, what she wanted, what she needed. And the worst part? She didn't even appreciate it. She was too busy playing house with that idiot. I took a sip of my beer, letting his words settle. He wasn't wrong. I had spent so much time bending over backward for Lauren, trying to keep our marriage afloat, that I hadn't noticed I was losing myself in the process. But now, I had the chance to rebuild. Jake grinned. So, what's next? You gonna start dating again? I snorted. Hell no. Come on, man. You can't tell me you're not even a little curious to see what's out there. I shook my head. I don't need to rush into anything. I just got my life back. I think I'd rather enjoy it for a while. Jake raised his beer in a mock toast. Fair enough. Just don't become a monk, all right? I laughed, clinking my bottle against his. No promises. The night stretched on, filled with easy conversation and familiar banter. It felt normal. And for the first time in a long time, I realized just how much I had missed that. By the time I left, the weight on my shoulders had lifted even more. I drove home with the windows down, the cool night air rushing past, the city lights flickering in the distance. This was my life now, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would take me. Waking up the next morning felt different, lighter. No tension in my chest, no lingering stress weighing down my thoughts. I had spent so much time carrying the burden of my failing marriage, the deceit, the betrayal, the slow unraveling of everything I thought was real. But now it was all gone. I made coffee, letting the warmth of the mug seep into my hands as I leaned against the counter. The house was quiet, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. Mine. I had spent years adjusting my life around Lauren, making space for her, compromising, bending when I didn't have to. Now, for the first time in forever, I didn't have to ask anyone what they wanted for breakfast, didn't have to worry about plans, didn't have to think about anyone but myself. And it wasn't sad. It wasn't lonely. It was freedom. I checked my phone out of habit. No missed calls, no messages. Nothing from Lauren. Good. Blocking her had been the best decision I had ever made. It had severed the last lingering thread of our past, given me the final push into the future that was waiting for me. I scrolled through my emails, stopping when I saw one from my lawyer. Final divorce confirmation. I opened it, reading through the details. Everything was official. No disputes, no loose ends. Lauren hadn't contested anything. She knew she had lost. I closed the email, exhaling slowly. It was over. Really, truly over. And I was okay. More than okay. I was ready for whatever came next. Later that evening, I met up with Jake again, this time at a bar instead of his place. It felt good to be out, to be around people, to feel like a part of the world again instead of just a spectator in my own life. Jake clapped me on the back as I sat down, pushing a drink toward me. All right, so, how does it feel? I took a sip, smirking. Which part? All of it. The divorce, the freedom, the fact that you're not tied to someone who didn't deserve you. I let the question settle for a moment, really thinking about it. Then, I nodded. It feels good. Better than I expected. No regrets. Good, Jake said with a grin. Now, let's toast to new beginnings. I raised my glass, meeting his. A new beginning. Yeah, that sounded about right. The next few weeks passed like a blur, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just existing. I was actually living. There was no more waking up to anxiety, no more checking my phone with a sense of dread, no more forcing myself to hold together a marriage that had been crumbling long before I knew it. The weight of Lauren's betrayal, of everything she had done, had finally lifted, and in its place was something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I started reclaiming my space, little by little. I got rid of the things that reminded me of her, not in some dramatic, rage-filled purge, but with quiet, deliberate intention. The framed pictures? Gone. The clothes she had left behind? Donated. The furniture we had picked out together? Replaced. I didn't need traces of her lingering in my life. This was my home now, my life, and I was going to make the most of it. One night, as I sat on the couch with a beer in hand, flipping through channels, I got a message from Jake. Jake? So, how's single life treating you? I smirked, shaking my head. Me? Not bad. Feels good to have my life back. Jake? Good. Now let's make sure you actually live it. Before I could ask what he meant, another message popped up. Jake, come out with us tomorrow. No excuses. Just a drink. You owe it to yourself. I hesitated, staring at the message. A few months ago, I would have made up an excuse, found a reason to say no. But now? Now, I had no reason to hide. No reason to sit around dwelling on the past. Me? All right. One drink. Jake, that's my guy. The next evening, I found myself at a rooftop bar, surrounded by laughter, music, and the hum of conversation. It felt different, good. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, wasn't worrying about what Lauren was doing, wasn't consumed by the wreckage of a failed marriage. I was just Ethan. And for the first time, that was more than enough.